Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a universe where the stars you see, well, they aren't just distant suns, but are literally the souls of those who lived before.
Mm-hmm.
Or a place where healing from some huge catastrophic event isn't really the end goal. It's just the messy, complicated beginning of figuring out who you even are now.
Yeah, that's a powerful starting point.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a really fascinating stack of sources you've shared. Looks like a collection of notes, outlines, maybe excerpts from this huge saga called Starkeep.
That's right.
Our mission,
Okay.
to guide you through the core concepts, the mysteries of this universe, based only on this material we have here. We want to pull out the most important insights
Yeah.
without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Think of it like getting the essential blueprint. Yeah,
Yeah.
a shortcut to understanding this pretty complex world.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is how these different sources seem to break down. We've got material that looks like it covers the ancient foundations in something called Genesis vaults. Then there's a major story arc focusing on a key character and this arc technology in Starkeep the Ark.
Right.
And then it looks like we have a deeper dive into the aftermath, the consequences, in Starkeep Arcanum. So we're going to try and synthesize these, moving through what seems like the chronological story presented in the text to give you that clear overview you're after.
Perfect. You want to get up to speed quickly, find those moments where things just click into place and, avoid that feeling of just drowning in information.
Definitely.
That's precisely what this deep dive is designed for. So let's jump right in.
Okay, so according to these sources, the story's deep past, its origins, seem rooted in this Genesis Vaults material. It describes a world that's, well, an infinite flat plane under some kind of plasma dome, initially an empty sky.
An infinite flat plane. Wow.
Yeah, and this is where the builders lived. They built these incredible cities. It even mentions one like Atlantis, and crucially, a massive global pyramid grid.
A pyramid grid across the entire plane. What were they building towards with that?
Well, the sources say their initial purpose, or at least the stated purpose, was creating this grid for a process they called ascension.
Ascension.
Yeah, and it was understood as like humanity becoming one with the stars. Sounds pretty grand, right?
It does sound grand, almost spiritual. And we meet some early key figures here.
We do. There's Ashara, who's the daughter of the High Architect. She starts questioning things, apparently. And then there's Reynos, who's described as an exile.
An exile.
Yeah.
So he's outside the system. Does he see something different?
He does. And it's Reynos who, well, drops the bombshell, really.
Yeah.
He reveals this disturbing truth. The pyramids. They aren't vehicles for transcendence. According to the text, they're prisons.
Prisons, not pathways.
Exactly. Ascension isn't becoming stars. It's more like disappearing or being converted into fuel. He warns the grid is actually breaking down because something is overfeeding on this whole ascension process.
Wow. Okay, so the entire foundation, this grand project, was built on a pretty dark secret then.
It seems so. And the consequences described are quite dire, too. The sources mention these harmonic disturbances starting to happen, and the appearance of these beings, called Watchers,
Watchers, what are they?
they're described as like failed ascended beings, souls trapped between dimensions. And later, the material apparently connects these Watchers back to some ancient entities tied to the very source of all this feeding.
Okay, so it's all connected,
Mhm.
which brings us to this feeding source. What is it? This thing called the eye.
Right, the eye. At first, it's just described maybe as a vortex of power within the grid, but the deeper, darker truth uncovered in these sources is pretty chilling.
Yeah.
The eye is an entity that feeds on consciousness, on souls. This entire ascension cycle, it was seemingly designed just to feed this being.
So the whole spiritual quest was just lunch.
Essentially. And the keepers, who people thought were guardians of this sacred process, the sources say they're actually just vessels channeling souls to the eye for potentially millennia.
That completely flips the whole idea of guardianship on its head. So
Yeah.
Ashara, the one asking questions, her role must be critical here.
Absolutely crucial. She manages to access ancient knowledge. The text mentions a quantum interface sphere, maybe a builder archive.
Okay.
And this confirms the eye's parasitic nature, but it also reveals something deeper. The builders weren't just engineers, they understood these profound universal concepts. And the eye's transformation into this hungry entity seems to have started with humanity's own greed.
Humanity's greed corrupted this cosmic thing. That adds another layer.
It does. So, thanks with this, horrifying truth, Ashara makes a really pivotal choice presented in the source. She refuses the eye's offer. Apparently, it offered her power,
Easy
unity.
refused.
Yeah, instead she decides to try and destroy it. There's mention of a failsafe device, which was meant to sever Earth from the eye, but intriguingly, the sources say it's also tied to the eye's will, almost like a final test.
A test from the thing she's trying to destroy.
Mm-hmm.
Complex. And how does this ancient conflict connect to the later parts of the story?
Well, here's the direct link, according to the source material. When the eye finally collapses, souls do become stars after all, just not in the way the builders originally promised.
So there's truth in the myth, but twisted.
Exactly. And this event, this collapse, is specifically when the ARC network, the core technology of the later saga, is seeded. And it potentially contains some kind of recursive code tied to a name, Zoaku.
Zoaku. Okay, so this cosmic battle from who knows how long ago directly seeds the network and potentially involves the main character of the later story.
Precisely, which provides a perfect transition, really, into Starkeep, the Ark. This part of the saga is set much, much later. It focuses on the sovereignty, a human-led civilization allied with a group called the Solmas,
Right.
and they navigate space using this Arc stream, the network seeded by the eye's collapse. It's described as a soul-based network for travel, communication, everything.
Soul-based travel. How does that work?
Well, they use technologies called soulcraft, piloted by individuals known as soul drivers. These are people who can manipulate soul essence itself.
Okay, soul drivers. So they're literally using consciousness, maybe soul energy, to power ships and navigate space. That's a pretty wild concept.
It is. And at the center of this is Zoaku, the name we heard linked to the seeding.
The name from the recursive code.
Exactly. The sources really emphasize his unique connection to this arc stream and these ancient glyphs embedded within it. They respond to him too quickly, it says, almost as if they recognize something in him.
Like he's keyed into it somehow.
Something like that. We're also introduced to his family, Kira and Tara Aku, and his friend, Tali Shanku, who's another soul driver.
Got it. So what's the main struggle in this era? What are they up against?
The main conflict here, according to the material, comes from the Olks. They're described as a dark faction of another group, the Dry,
Ulks.
and they're attacking key points in this arc stream lattice, trying to destabilize it, corrupt it. There's a vivid example given of an attack on a temple on Mars, which gets forcefully restructured into the stream itself. It's quite invasive.
Restructuring reality into this soul network. That sounds dangerous. Is there anything fighting back or trying to fix it?
Yes, amidst this conflict, the sources introduce something called the fulcrum. It's described as a powerful device, but also ethically controversial. It's being used to stabilize a part of the arc stream that broke away.
Ethically controversial.
Why? The source doesn't detail exactly why, but hints it's powerful and perhaps has unintended consequences. What's really striking is its connection to Zo. The text says it even spoke ancient Dry at one point, proclaiming, "The gods shall rise again."
Whoa. The gods shall rise again. That throws a whole different light on things. Ancient prophecies, maybe.
It definitely adds that layer. And Zo's journey in the Ark is deeply personal. It's described as a path of self-discovery. There's a powerful scene mentioned in a place called the Temple of Mirrors.
Temple of Mirrors.
Yeah. And there, he learns he carries multiple soul print lineages, like echoes of past beings or ancestors within his soul, including some lineages that were thought to be extinct.
So he's got multiple lives or identities resonating within him.
Something like that. And this is where he starts to realize he's not just, a participant in all this. He might be the key and the lock to something much bigger within the Ark.
The key and the lock.
Yeah.
That's cryptic. Does this attract unwanted attention?
It certainly seems to. This arc also brings in Sentient, who sounds like a major antagonist figure. He's described almost as an inversion of light. He feeds off the arc, and he believes that entropy decay is the only true balance.
An inversion of light.
Yeah.
Feeding off the soul network.
Okay. And the sources say Sentient appears directly in Zo's mind, claims to be part of him, shows him visions, and forces him into this critical choice about his destiny. The quote mentioned is, "Choose, and know that one must die."
One must die. Intense pressure. How does Zoe handle that?
It is intense, but Zoe reaches this critical decision point.
Yeah.
And he chooses to be human, is how the source puts it, to decide his own path rather than follow some destiny dictated by ancient echoes or these cosmic forces.
He rejects the forced choice.
He does. And the text makes a point of how the arc itself responds to this choice, not with commands or judgment, but with silence, respect almost. And this decision, this assertion of self, sets him on the path towards opening something called the Arcanum's Heart.
The Arcanum.
Huh.
That sounds important, linking to the next source. But first, there's a major event at Ball.
Yes, then comes this catastrophic event at Ball. The Opes try to invert a Nexus temple there, turn it into a kind of soul sink, and it causes a massive collapse of the stream. It sounds devastating.
A collapse. So Zoe gets caught in this.
He does. The source describes him descending into the blast, guided by some inner arcanum voice telling him he must not survive this as he
Must
is.
not survive as he is, suggesting transformation through destruction.
Exactly. And in the aftermath, back on Mars, Zoe is pulled from the rubble. He's somehow able to heal himself using resonance, this powerful, maybe innate ability. And there are others watching. And Agent Ortega notes his increasing resonance, while a Commander Rhea seems to be protecting him. This event fundamentally changes Zoe.
And that propels us into the next part of the saga, right?
Right. That pivotal event at Baal is explicitly stated in the sources as the transition point into Starkeep, the Arcanum. And the material highlights this shift in focus pretty clearly. Book 1, The Ark, was about rescue, from pain, from immediate crisis. Okay.
Book 2, The Arcanum, is about what you do with that power once you're healed, or maybe radically changed is a better way to put it.
Right, because healing isn't always straightforward.
Not at all. The core metaphysical challenge posed here is, what happens when the healed child meets the broken adult? It introduces this whole new theme of reforging the self. Can the soul stay whole, or even should it stay whole after these profound, soul-altering experiences like resurrection, memory loss, or even dimensional fracture?
That's a really powerful question. And Zoe obviously undergoes exactly that kind of profound transformation. Did he? Did he literally die at Baal? Well, the text says he didn't physically survive in his previous form, but his rhythm, his essence, was still felt in this dream. His rebirth is described quite vividly by Tally, his friend. She sees him just appear, not as he was, but as stream consciousness in skin.
Stream consciousness and skin, wow.
Yeah, and the text says he can now sync the entire arc lattice without using any instruments. That's a massive change in his capabilities, and maybe in his fundamental being.
Okay, so he's fundamentally different. Does this new state bring new challenges, new enemies?
It absolutely does. This section brings a central new enemy into focus. The first hunger?
The first hunger, that sounds ominous.
It does, and the sources define it in a really interesting way. It's not described as evil exactly, but as cosmically indifferent. A force that feeds on memory, on soul imprints, on meaning itself. It just seeks blankness.
Blankness, like erasing things.
Yeah, it's likened to entropy, but with a kind of purpose behind it. And it has a prophet figure called the Null Shepherd. This enemy represents a deeper, more existential threat. And it seems tied to very human fears, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, the fear of being forgotten, of your life, your experiences, losing their significance. Or maybe that's societal pressure sometimes to conform, to smooth out your edges after trauma or big change, which can feel like losing your true self, leading to that kind of inner blankness.
That connection to real-world fears definitely makes this cosmic threat feel surprisingly resonant, yeah.
Right. And the Arcanum source material also mentions several other really intriguing plot points, hinting at the complexity of this stage.
Like what?
Well, there's the lost keep just vanishing, a child being born who somehow carries fragments of Zoe's memory. This place called Druidic Space, described as another dimension bleeding ancient entities into the material universe.
Ancient entities, okay.
And this really unsettling discovery of Zoe's unaged physical body being found somewhere bearing the Null Shepherd's smile, but his soul is missing.
His old body. Still out there.
Creepy.
Very. And then there's the hive of soul drivers, stirring maybe a collective consciousness, offering this chilling bargain. Sacrifice your individual identity to become part of the many. Giving up yourself for connection. Another heavy choice.
Definitely. And there's also mention of a battle of the hollow sun where a star is found inverted into pure negative space, and it needs protection from the last Arcanum shard. So, yeah, it's a lot going on.
It really is. A lot of threads. Are there core themes pulling this together?
Yes. The sources explicitly lay out some thematic pillars for this book, which really drive home the core ideas. Things like healing isn't the end, it's the beginning of redefinition.
Okay, that's key.
Also, that memory both makes us and breaks us. That even light casts shadows, and some shadows dream, suggesting complexity even in supposedly good forces. And this fundamental concept recurs. Souls are the only real matter.
Souls are the only real matter. That underpins everything. So how does Zoe navigate all this? Is there a confrontation with Sentin again?
There is. It leads to a climax described involving the transformed Zoe and Sentin meeting at the Arcanum core. Zoe faces sentient, who the sources explicitly describe as being made from the Ark's own unhealed wounds.
The network's trauma personified.
Exactly, and Sentient actually offers himself up to be destroyed. He seems to be seeking an end to his existence.
He wants oblivion.
It seems so. But Zoe, now fundamentally different, having gone through his own transformation, offers something else entirely. He offers choice. And this leads not to Sentient's destruction, but to his completion.
Completion, not destruction. What does that mean?
The text doesn't fully spell it out, but it implies integration, understanding, maybe even healing for Sentient rather than simple annihilation. It's a different approach to dealing with an enemy or a wound.
And what's the outcome of this encounter for the wider universe?
It's significant according to the text. The arc stream itself folds into new paths, and it explicitly says these paths are not designed for war anymore.
The network itself changes purpose.
Yes, and Zoe becomes the keeper. He's described as being aligned with the arc's breath, its rhythm, and the glyphs, but the material emphasizes this is alignment, not submission. He's working with it, not controlled by it.
So he finds his place within this transformed system.
Right. And the arc itself becomes quiet. It's described as holding dreams now, rather than just routing souls like some kind of cosmic transport system. It's a fundamental shift in the nature of reality for them.
Wow. That sounds like a resolution almost. But you mentioned lingering threats.
Yeah, even after this profound shift and apparent resolution, the sources make sure to leave some lingering questions and potential threats hanging.
Such as?
Well, there's mention of a suspected conspiracy, maybe a shadow faction, still watching the council. There's a dormant Zoaku sub-protocol left behind somewhere in data space, like a ghost in the machine.
A piece of his old self, maybe?
Possibly. And perhaps most ominously, the Eye's final fragment, Remember the Entity from the very beginning, is apparently still pulsing and dreaming deep beneath some vault.
So the original threat isn't entirely gone.
It suggests that these cycles of conflict, of self-discovery, and the search for meaning, while they might be transformed, are far from over. The universe has changed, but maybe not entirely settled?
Okay, so taking all of this in the world, from ancient cosmic parasites and soul-fueled networks to this intense personal transformation and existential threats that literally feed on memory. How do these huge sweeping ideas presented in these sources, how might they resonate with things in your own life,
Well, think about that core challenge that came up in the Arcanum, right? That healing from pain, whatever it is, isn't the finish line. It's really just the starting gun for redefining who you are now.
Right.
When you've gone through something major, maybe a trauma, a big life change, even just significant personal growth, doesn't figuring out who you are after that feel like a whole new journey in itself? It's not just about being fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about integration, finding the new shape of yourself. And what about that enemy, the first hunger, the one feeding on memory and meaning, seeking blankness?
Doesn't that tap into something very human, that fear of being forgotten, of your life's experiences maybe losing their significance over time? Or perhaps feeling that pressure sometimes to conform, to smooth out the edges of your identity until you feel, well, a bit blank yourself.
Yeah, losing your uniqueness to fit in, or just fading away. It's a deep fear.
It really is. Or look at Zoe's journey. He's shaped by his past, all those soul echoes, his lineage, so much history imprinted on him. But ultimately, he chooses his own path. He even embraces a transformation that means his old self literally doesn't survive. What does that say to you about the power of individual choice in defining who you become? Especially when you're carrying the weight of your history, your past experiences, maybe past traumas.
It's a choice is paramount, even when the past feels overwhelming. It's about agency.
Exactly. Agency. And finally, maybe ponder the nature of knowledge itself and hidden truths, from the builders hiding the eye's true parasitic purpose to the arc itself kind of hiding its own unhealed wounds in the form of sentient. Why are some truths buried? Sometimes by others, sometimes maybe even by ourselves. And what does it take personally to uncover them, especially when they challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself or the world around you? It takes courage, right?
It definitely takes courage. Facing uncomfortable truths is hard work.
So we've covered a pretty vast landscape in this deep dive, haven't we? From those ancient cycles of ascension that turned out to be, well, cosmic feeding,
Yeah.
to the incredibly complex journey of this one soul driver, Zoaku, grappling with destiny, redefining himself, and ultimately transforming the very network that powers his universe while facing down a threat that literally feeds on meaning itself.
And we've pulled out some really profound ideas presented in these sources along the way. The critical importance of memory, not just as history, but as a fundamental part of existence, and how it can be both strength and vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. And that challenging ongoing work of redefining the self after profound experiences, it's not a one and done thing?
No. And the ever-present struggle against forces, whether they're external or internal, that seem to seek to erase meaning, connection, or maybe just individuality.
Right. And according to this material, souls are presented as the only real matter. And even these ancient, hungry entities like sentient, they don't just have to be destroyed. They can find some kind of completion.
Which is a hopeful note,
Yeah.
in a way. And Zoaku, reborn from that blast at Bahal, becomes the keeper, described as being in alignment with the universal rhythm of the arc. Not controlling it, but part of its flow.
A very different kind of power.
Exactly. So here's a final thought drawn from these sources to leave you with. If memory and soul are the fundamental reality, as this universe suggests, and even cosmic threats might just be seeking understanding or completion, even through destructive means,
Yeah.
what does that truly mean for how we define who we are, and who our perceived enemies might be? And maybe what secrets might still be hidden? Not just in ancient vaults scattered across the cosmos, but perhaps in the quiet, unexplored spaces of our own histories, or even the dormant subprotocols lurking within the fabric of our own world.
That's definitely something to mull over.
Lots to think about. Keep exploring those ideas based on the sources we discussed today.